I'm Major General Alexandra Alex Morgan of the United States Space Force, and right now I'm standing in the middle of a federal courtroom in downtown Washington, D.C., wearing the uniform I've bled for, staring straight at my parents in the front row and listening to them call me unstable, unworthy. A failure. They keep talking over each other. My mother's voice cracks as she recites the grievances Luke has scripted for her. My father's stare is fixed beyond me, like he's replaying some invisible script in his head. And Luke, my little brother turned CFO of Valentech Solutions, sits there smirking, as though I'm just a character in some family drama he's penned himself. And here's the irony: I'm the one who saved his life, the one who watched his back when we were kids, building forts in Grandma's backyard. But that was years ago. Now Luke sits there, fingers drumming on the table, waiting for me to break. He thinks if he just rattles on about my deployments, my so-called abandonment of the family, and the fact that I'm the one holding the title and the medals, I'll collapse under the weight of his words. He's wrong. He has no idea what I've faced. The walls of this courtroom are a pale fluorescent white, and the hum of the air conditioning drones beneath every accusation. I've learned to turn down distractions over the years. It's how you survive endless shifts in cyber command centers and long nights watching lines of code flash across screens like digital waves. My pulse is steady, even as I feel the compass I carry in my pocket click against my thigh, the old brass compass my grandpa gave me the night before I shipped out to basic training. Its needle broken forever, pointing between north and northwest. It's a symbol more than just a keepsake. It reminds me that direction isn't always absolute, that sometimes you have to trust the little piece of yourself that still points the right way, even when everything around you is fractured. I remember that night when Grandpa handed it to me. The porch light glowed orange against damp wood, and the cicadas hummed like radio static in the summer air. He said, "Keep it close, Alex. When you lose your path, let this remind you that you find your own true north." I smiled then, thinking it was a metaphor. I didn't know how literal it would become. Because here I am, years later, unraveling an entire conspiracy. My own brother built one that turned our parents' signatures into weapons, erasing my name from the deeds to the house I grew up in, and redirecting months of veteran relief funds into shell accounts tied to Arvin International. And now they've painted me as the villain. She amassed wealth on the family's dime, they said in the local news clip that played last week. She manipulated her own flesh and blood. My letters home were called psychological pressure tactics, my combat pay called illicit influence. My uniform and my reputation were on trial. But truth is thicker than blood, and sometimes it takes a battlefield mind to see the patterns no one else notices. Last night, I sat alone in my apartment, just me, the broken compass, and my laptop screen glowing in the dark. Every document, every bank statement, every log of IP addresses slid under my fingertips until I tracked the money trail back 3 offshore layers. I watched the data flicker the same smear of blue printer ink in the corner of the deed transfer document I found in Mom's files. The timestamp on a deepfake email referencing my Space Force ID application, approved for financial hardship assistance, it read. The email had my name, my address, even my classified deployment dates. Whoever did this knew exactly how to weaponize my service. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight when I realized the depth of Luke's betrayal. Not just fraud, not just family drama escalation, straight to cyber espionage, identity theft, and national security breaches. The funny thing is, Luke isn't smart enough to have cooked up all the tech himself. Emily, his wife, pitched her veterans counseling practice as some altruistic side gig, but her files linked her directly to Valentech shell entities and Arvin International front organizations flagged by Joint Cyber Command years ago. They had used my name as a shield, my family name as a smokescreen. Someone once told me in Afghanistan that the enemy always hides in plain sight. I thought he meant insurgents blending into villages. Turns out it applies to home too. When the judge calls this recess, I'm going to slip out with Dr. Marcus Allen and Colonel David Reyes from Shadowline, the off-the-books network I still trust more than any court official, and we're going to upload the final piece of evidence to the courtroom's projector system live feed of Emily's encrypted conference call with an Arvin International operative. I haven't told anyone what I plan, not even the judge, because I know how this works. The minute they realize I'm going to expose a sitting judge's equipment, they'll shut me down. So I'm going to hijack it, push the footage, and let the lies collapse under their own weight. It's risky if it fails. I get held in contempt, my career is over, and I may never see sunlight again. But I've waited 27 years to hear the truth spoken in my blood. I'm tired of silence. I'm tired of being the good soldier who endures. Because endurance without action is complicity. Right now, my family thinks they've won. They've convinced half the country I'm a monster. But when those images flicker onto the big screen, my brother's face illuminated as he negotiates with a known foreign intelligence front, I'll see the fear in his eyes. That's when I'll know I still have a compass pointing true north. The bailiff announces the judge will reconvene in 5 minutes. The hush in the courtroom is almost deafening, the anticipation like static in my veins. My parents' faces have gone ashen. Luke's jaw is tight. My mother's hand grips my father's arm so hard I can see her knuckles blanch. I breathe in slowly, the weight of my uniform straps pressing into my shoulders. I glance down at the compass in my pocket, feeling its uneven edge. It'll be time soon. And once that feed goes live, there's no turning back. Because some battles aren't fought on distant planets or in covert server rooms. Some battles happen under fluorescent lights, where the only weapons are words evidence and a broken compass pointing home. Stay with me, because when those doors close and the footage starts, everything changes, and I'll need you right there with me. I slipped out of the back door of the courthouse with my heart still hammering against my ribs, adrenaline buzzing like a live wire in my veins. Dr. Marcus Allen and Colonel David Reyes were waiting by the unmarked black SUV we'd stashed around the corner, their faces illuminated only by the glow of a single street lamp. "You ready?" Marcus asked, voice low but steady. I nodded, braiding my fingers around the cold brass of the broken compass in my breast pocket. That compass had become more than a family heirloom. It was my moral North Star, the one thing I held onto when everything else felt like it was collapsing around me. Tonight, it had to guide me through one more impossible gamble. Inside the courthouse, I could almost hear the muffled voices of the bailiff calling everyone back to their seats. I could almost see Luke's smug expression, the way he'd leaned into the microphone to remind the judge and the jury that I was unstable mentally, unfit to own property, unworthy of my own name. But just beyond those doors, I had a chance to turn the tide. I slid into the back seat and leaned over to Reyes. "Run the override code through the auxiliary port. I need that feed up in 20 seconds. He nodded, pulling a small tablet from his pocket and tapping out a flurry of commands with fingers that never trembled. In my hand, the compass felt impossibly heavy, reminding me that the risk was real. If this failed, I stood to lose everything: my rank, my reputation, possibly even my freedom. As the SUV rolled forward, Marcus pulled up the live courtroom feed on his own device. "Judge Liu just called us back in," he murmured. "Any second now." I closed my eyes and drew in a slow breath, picturing that broken compass glued to my palm, pointing me back to the purpose I'd spent my life cultivating. Protecting the vulnerable, uncovering the truth, refusing to be broken by betrayal. I pictured the start of this whole nightmare, finding that deepfake email in my inbox, the same one Luke and Emily had used, and to siphon off veteran relief funds into Valentech shell accounts linked to Arvin International. I remembered my chest sinking the moment I realized they'd used not only my name, but classified deployment dates no civilian should ever have. It was more than family drama. It was treason, espionage, identity theft, and I was about to expose it all live in federal court. We parked 2 blocks away and cut through the alley behind the courthouse, Reyes covering my back, while Marcus carried the portable server rack under one arm. The rack was small, no bigger than a suitcase, but inside it held enough processing power to hijack the courthouse's AV system and stream encrypted files directly onto the judge's bench monitor. I'd spent weeks coding and testing this rig in secret, using old base infrastructure backdoors that even the Department of Justice's IT department didn't know existed. I'd once used similar methods to trace hostile cyber actors halfway across the globe. Tonight, I would use it on my own family's lie. The hallway into the AV control room was deserted, save for a single janitor's cart parked in front of the door. Marcus slipped a slim crowbar from his jacket and quietly popped the lock. Inside, the tiny room hummed with electrical panels and server racks labeled court recording and evidence storage. I worked the panel cover loose while Reyes kept watch, then reached in and yanked free the primary HDMI encoder. That exposed a series of ports beneath one labeled Local Input. I pressed the rack's cable home with a click, then handed the tablet to Marcus. "Override now." His fingers moved again in a blur, and a second later, the overhead lights flickered as the courthouse AV rebooted into our own custom firmware. Upstairs, I could hear the judge's gavel rap through the ceiling vents. "All rise," the bailiff intoned, and I flattened myself against the wall, sweat prickling beneath my uniform. Reyes pressed a hand to my arm. "We're live in 3, 2. Marcus's voice crackled in my earpiece before cutting out as the hallway lights dimmed briefly. That was our signal. I closed my eyes one final time, picturing my grandpa's face under the porch lamp, that orange haze of memory, and the night he pressed the compass into my palm. "Find your true north," he whispered. Tonight, that true north was justice. I slipped back out into the courtroom, moving past the stunned bailiff and sliding into the seat beside my lawyer. No one noticed, no one but Judge Liu, whose eyebrows shot up in surprise as the courtroom monitors abruptly switched from the usual docket summary to the encrypted video feed Marcus had initiated. "Your Honor," I said, standing voice steady and calm like they always taught us in debriefings. "Breathe, speak slowly, own your position. If the court will indulge me, I have one more exhibit to present." The judge blinked, turning her gaze toward the ceiling speakers, as a crisp digital voice announced, "Activating Exhibit X, live communications." A hush fell. The jurors leaned forward as an emergency broadcast banner popped up on their screens. "Unauthorized data stream detected." Then the feed cut to a grainy, encrypted conference call window showing Emily Chen's face, her perfect makeup cracking at the edges, static dancing across her features as she spoke quietly in Mandarin, something about confirmation of asset transfer and extraction protocols. Luke's voice chimed in flat and clipped, referencing Phase 2 rollout and lockdown after the hearing. Even through the compression artifacts, you could see his mouth twist into a thin smile, and my heart lurched at the sight. That was my brother, the boy I'd built tree forts with, now negotiating with a foreign intelligence front against me, against everything I'd ever stood for. The courtroom erupted into chaos, gasps, murmurs, the pounding of a bailiff racing for the mic. My mother's face went ghostly white, and my father's stiff posture slumped so fast I thought his spine had rooted itself in shame. Emily's eyes widened as she realized her attempt at deniability had failed, and she tried to click away, but the stream was triaged by Reyes's code. No closing, no muting, no escaping. In that moment, I felt a fierce surge of vindication, but it was tempered by sorrow because I knew exactly how much this would shatter my parents. This was war, but it was war at home where no one saluted and no one won clean. Then a new window popped up on the screen labeled Document Dump, and files began to download thousands of pages of bank records, shell company registrations. Arvin International, contracts with hitherto unknown sponsors. Each click sounded like a hammer blow in my mind. I watched as the judge's face shifted from shock to resolve. She jabbed a finger at the bailiff. "Lock the doors," she ordered in a calm voice that sent fresh ripples through the courtroom. "No one leaves." And for a moment, I felt the weight of the compass in my pocket press me down like an anchor because I'd crossed the line. I'd broken the silence. I'd exposed my own family to federal investigation. As the bailiff's leather-shod boots thudded on marble, I felt every eye in that room turn to me. Jurors, reporters hidden behind one-way glass, the judge's clerks. My pulse hammered, but my voice stayed even as I added, "These files prove a coordinated campaign of fraud, identity theft, and cyber espionage executed under the cover of family trust and veteran relief funds. I respectfully request immediate federal custody for any individuals named herein, as well as protective measures for all identified veteran victims." My words sliced through the commotion like a laser. And in that charged silence, I saw Luke's chest rise and fall fast, like he'd been punched in the gut. Emily's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Mom covered her mouth, eyes glistening. Dad looked away, unable to face me. The judge tapped her gavel. "This court is officially in recess to process these new exhibits," she announced, voice echoing. All parties are to remain in place until further notice. Then she banged the gavel again, and the room descended into controlled pandemonium agents. In suits began moving in, cameras clicked, and my lawyer reached over to squeeze my hand. That grip reminded me of what I'd lost: the warmth of family trust, the belief that home was a safe harbor. But it also reminded me of what I'd gained: clarity, purpose, the hard-won knowledge that sometimes you have to shatter the world you knew in order to save it. I sank back into my chair, trying to steady my breath, and glanced at the judge's bench, where the encrypted feed still flickered. The judge was reviewing a short message that flashed on her screen. Arvin International flagged for hostile intel operations. I remembered the first time I'd encountered Arvin in a DoD briefing years ago, a footnote on a slide about covert adversary networks. I'd never thought it would land on my doorstep. Now it was here, laid bare in living color. My lawyer leaned in. "Alex, they're bringing in DOJ Cybercrimes Division. They'll want your testimony." I nodded, fingers curling around the compass. It felt warm against my cold palm, as though it recognized my resolve. "Then I'll testify," I said, voice firm. "I'll walk through every line of code, every transaction, until the truth is undeniable." My voice carried through the suddenly hushed courtroom, and in that moment, I felt something shift inside me, a calm that ran deeper than anger or betrayal. It was the clarity that came from living by a code stricter than family ties, the code of duty, honor, and truth. Outside, as the courtroom doors clanged shut behind the FBI agents and the judge's clerks, I caught sight of my mother's reflection in the polished marble. She stared at me with a mixture of horror and awe. I wondered what she saw: a daughter who'd become an enemy, a soldier forced to fight on home soil, or simply someone who refused to bow to lies, no matter how close to her heart they were. The janitor vacuumed a tile in the corner, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred. For him, it was just another night's work. For me, it was a turning point. I had exposed a betrayal that ran deeper than money, a betrayal of trust, of service, of family itself. And now I had to live with the aftermath. The next hearing would be televised. Prosecutors would ask piercing questions. Journalists would dissect every syllable of the encrypted conference call. My reputation, or what remained of it, would hang in the balance. I rose, slowly leveling my gaze at the judge. "Your Honor," I said softly, "whatever comes next, I want the victims protected before my own charges are addressed." The judge met my eyes, and for a moment I saw a flicker of respect. Then she nodded and signaled the bailiff to clear the room except for essential personnel. As the jurors filed out, I caught one last glimpse of Luke's face, pale, defeated, and still refusing to meet my eyes. I left the courtroom under escort, the broken compass burning a hole in my pocket, its fractured needle still somehow pointing me forward. Cameras flashed on the steps. Reporters shouted questions I couldn't yet answer. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, I needed to steel myself for the storm to come, to testify under oath, to stand witness to my own story, to face down the public's gaze. I had chosen this path. I had broken the silence. Outside, a cold wind riffled through the marble columns. Washington's skyline loomed overhead, a jagged silhouette of glass and steel. It was past midnight, but the city never slept, not anymore. Not when the shadows had grown so long and the secrets so deep. I took a breath of the night air, tasting faint ozone and rain on the horizon. Behind me, the courthouse doors closed with a decisive thud. In front of me, uncertain battles loomed: legal, personal, moral. But I knew one thing: I would not shrink from them. Because some fights aren't about vengeance. They're about reclaiming your own story. And sometimes to do that, you have to shatter everything you once believed was home. Stay close. I'm only getting started. The courthouse may be quiet now, but the real trial, the one that will define me, is just around the corner. I closed the door of my rented studio apartment and leaned against it for a long moment, the echo of the courthouse steps still ringing in my ears. Outside, Washington's night traffic thrummed like a distant heartbeat, but inside, my world had narrowed to the dim glow of a single desk lamp and the weight of what was coming. The cameras had caught me on the courthouse steps. My uniform crisp, my expression steely, but that polished image collapsed the instant I shut the door. My reflection in the hall mirror showed a woman hollowed out by weeks of betrayal. Eyes rimmed red from too many sleepless nights and too many cups of cold coffee. My phone buzzed relentlessly texts from old teammates offering support messages from reporters demanding comment, and a flood of DMs from veterans thanking me for exposing the scam. Some called me a hero, others called me a traitor. The dissonance felt like a physical ache. I swallowed hard, trying to breathe through the knot in my chest. The next hearing was less than 48 hours away, and this time everything would be televised. Every question, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt would be broadcast into living rooms across America. Social media had already spun my story into 1,000 different narratives, some heroic, some vile. Public opinion polls suggested a near-even split. Half believed I'd defended public trust. The other half felt I'd destroyed a family for attention. I'd never sought the spotlight, but now it shone relentless and unforgiving. I flicked on my laptop and pulled up the case file witness list, pre-trial motions, evidentiary logs. My lawyer had high hopes that the DOJ Cybercrimes Division would back me up, but I knew how fast a judge could rule to exclude evidence, or how quickly a bad headline could sway a jury pool. My hand drifted to my breast pocket, where the brass compass still lay. It felt colder than before, its broken needle twitching unpredictably. I closed my eyes and pictured my grandpa's porch. The cicada hum, the orange glow of that single bulb. "Find your own true north," he'd said. I pressed the compass to my heart, willing it to steady me. The truth was my strategy, but truth alone didn't win trials. Credibility did. I had to be bulletproof under oath, immune to every attempt to frame me as the scheming sibling or the unhinged veteran. My entire career, my identity rested on this. I pulled up my testimony outline. First, I'd recount how I discovered the deepfake email, a benign-looking message masquerading as a veteran's assistance approval, my personal data weaponized to funnel money offshore. Then I'd detail the forensic link, the unique shade of blue printer ink smudge, on the deed transfer, matching the ink my brother Luke had cursed over after long college nights in his part-time print shop. Next, I'd walk through the encrypted video feed, Emily's voice offering Phase 2 protocols to an Arvin International operative, Luke's clipped laughter in the background. That footage had blown the courthouse doors off their hinges, but the DOJ wanted me to narrate it all, room by room, file by file. It would be a marathon, not a sprint. My thoughts drifted to the social landscape beyond these walls. On one hand, the #StandWithAlex hashtag trended with veterans and civilians alike, citing patriotism, integrity, and the refusal to let your own blood excuse treason. On the other hand, I'd seen segments on cable news branding me Colonel Meanstreak, family, ruiner, untrustworthy officer. The divide felt almost emblematic of a larger cultural tug-of-war about loyalty to country, to family, to self. I knew the framers of my story, a military hero turned family villain, the archetype that sold headlines. Yet here I was, trying to break free of narrative cliches and remind people that complexity lives in human hearts, not in sound bites. I took a cold sip of coffee and opened my encrypted notebook, one I'd carried since my first deployment, where I'd scribbled lines of code and notes in faded pencil. Beneath my neatly typed testimony plan lurked raw, messy scribbles. Mom loved me to once. Dad's stare was pride, then regret. Am I wrong to break this family? My mind spun with doubt. Was I too harsh to expose my parents? Should I have confronted them privately, tried to heal the rift first? But every moment I delayed more, veterans stayed vulnerable to the same scam. The moral calculus was brutal: preserve family ties or protect innocent people from exploitation. I had chosen the latter. I minimized the incident reports and pulled up the DOJ's secure portal. My contact there, Agent Simone Ortega, had been an ally, sharp, principled, the kind of prosecutor who believed in service as much as I did. Yesterday, she'd sent me a curt note: be ready for procedural pushes from defense counsel. They'll file motions to dismiss for chain of custody issues. Expect them. I scrolled through the motion drafts, tangles of legalese, arguing that the hack to the courthouse AV system constituted evidence tampering. They'd seize on that one-sentence, unauthorized data stream detected and spin it into a narrative that I'd broken into government systems, not exposed evidence they'd concealed. If that took hold, all my forensic work could be disqualified. A flicker on my tablet pulled me from the screen a small video file labeled Watch List Update High Priority. I hesitated, then tapped play. A grainy clip showed a meeting room in Arvind's Singapore offices, the same logo I'd traced a stylized A with 3 concentric circles. A foreign operative slid a USB drive across the table to Emily's reflection in the glass, her face lit by a laptop screen. A second figure stood in the back of the room, masked in shadow, someone I didn't recognize. The caption read, Project Eclipse Commence Phase 3. My blood ran cold. Phase 3. We'd only uncovered Phase 2. Whatever came next was worse, broader, more dangerous, more devastating. My pulse hammered in my throat as the compass in my pocket buzzed, needle-stabbing east for a split second before flopping northwest again. The symbol I'd clung to was warning me I was on the cusp of something bigger than a family feud or a courtroom battle. This was a network, an international conspiracy, with tentacles reaching into defense contractors, veterans, programs, maybe even government IT. And I was the only person standing between Phase 3 going live and thousands of people having their identities and possibly national security secrets stolen from under their noses. I shut the video and leaned back in my chair, hands clenched into fists. The risk wasn't just losing my career. It was putting myself and everyone I cared about in mortal danger. If Project Eclipse moved forward, Arvind's operatives would be ready to eliminate anyone who knew too much. Maybe that figure in the back of the meeting room was a hitman or a mole watching Emily's every move. I could no longer afford to operate from a courthouse safe booth. I needed to go deeper undercover to infiltrate the very systems hosting Project Eclipse's coordination. I reached for my secure burner phone and punched in Agent Ortega's number. She answered on the second ring. Agent, I said, voice tight. We've got video of a Phase 3 summit. I need an extraction team on this, and fast. There was a long pause. Alex, you've gone beyond authorized channels, she said firmly. If you push this through official DOJ, they'll freeze all our assets today. I closed my eyes. Then I'll do it off the books, I replied. I'll get you the data, but you need to know what's coming. She sighed, a sound of someone who had waited too long for the right call. All right, she said. I'll mobilize a small team, but you owe me compliance with every chain of custody step from here on. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Understood, I said. I hung up and exhaled. My body felt taut wound like a spring. The torn compass in my pocket seemed to settle for a moment, as if recognizing that I'd found a new purpose, a true north far beyond family loyalty. I sat in the glow of the laptop screen and drafted a secure message to my Shadowline network. We needed a digital infiltration plan, but this time not just to expose, but to disable Project Eclipse's command servers. I coded a backdoor that could trigger a remote wipe of critical nodes the moment we had confirmation. It was the kind of hack I'd once dismissed as too risky, because lives could hang in the balance. Once you pull the plug on a live server, the fallout could be catastrophic. But Project Eclipse had already gambled with lives. If we didn't act, the damage would be far worse. My finger hovered over the send button. I glanced at the compass again, then at the compass tattoo on my left wrist. Its broken needle rendered in fine ink, a permanent reminder that direction isn't always obvious. Tonight, I'd have to trust my instincts over everything else. I hit send, watched the encrypted message whisk through dark fiber lines half a world away, and closed the lid of my laptop. I stood and walked to the window, pulling aside the curtain. The city lights stretched out in a glittering grid, indomitable and indifferent. Somewhere below, a cab hummed by its headlights, throwing streaks of yellow across the pavement. In a few hours, I'd stand before a national television audience, unwavering beneath bright studio lights, answering questions meant to twist truth into doubt. But first, I would uncover Phase 3's central server in Langley and plant the backdoor that would once activated erase Project Eclipse from the network. My heart slammed as I realized the stakes. If I failed, I'd be flagged as a cybercriminal, branded a saboteur, silenced forever. If I succeeded, I'd crash a digital fortress and potentially save thousands. My pulse slowed as I pressed my palm to the glass. The cool of the window seeped into my skin, carrying with it the distant hum of traffic and the faint promise of dawn. The broken compass in my pocket pointed me forward into the next most dangerous chapter of this war. I exhaled. My voice was quiet, barely a whisper. "Let's finish this." And as the first hint of pale blue light crept over the horizon, I squared my shoulders and braced myself for the infiltration that would decide not just my fate, but the fate of every veteran, every operative, and every innocent person caught in the crossfire. The world outside slept on, unaware that its security hung in the balance, guided only by a fractured needle and a soldier's unbroken resolve. But some battles require more than evidence, and courtroom heroes, they demand action in the shadows. And the darkest part of this fight was only just beginning. I backed the black SUV into the shadowed loading bay behind the Langley contractor facility, heart pounding so hard I could hear it thump against my ribs. My uniform was replaced by dark tactical gear cargo pants, a fleece-lined jacket, black gloves, but I still carried the broken brass compass in my pocket. It felt heavier than before, as if the weight of every choice I'd made had accumulated in that fractured needle. Beside me, Marcus Allen crouched low, assembling a portable EMP device disguised as a power draw tester. Reyes double-checked the encrypted laptop screen, flickering green lines of code. Our plan was simple on paper: breach the external server rack, deploy the backdoor I'd coded, exfiltrate the Phase 3 command node data, then ghost out before the security team could even react. In practice, it was the riskiest operation I'd ever attempted, more dangerous than any combat mission, because if we were caught here, federal charges and espionage indictments would follow, and my family's name would be forever smeared, not as victims of betrayal, but as traitors themselves. Still, I pressed my palm to the cool metal of the SUV's hood, felt the reassurance of that broken compass tapping against my skin. True north, Alex. True north. We slipped through the security perimeter fence under cover of a shift change blackout. Marcus had temporarily looped the CCTV feeds and ducked into a dim corridor lined with rows of locked server cabinets. The air smelled of ozone and circuitry, tasted like stale coffee burned by overworked technicians. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, reminding me how exposed we were. I led the way to the labeled Intel Ops rack fingers, brushing the faded letters. Reyes knelt, pried open the panel with a silent snap. Wires spilled out like tangled roots. My fingers flew over the command prompt on my tablet, typing the override codes that would disengage the tamper sensors and let us upload the back door. My pulse accelerated as lines of confirmation scrawled across the screen: sensor disabled, access granted, deploy initiated. Then we watched the LED lights on the server blink green to amber to red. The back door had landed. Suddenly, footfalls pounded down the hall. A guard's low voice carried around the corner. "Hey, who's there?" Marcus hit the EMP, and for a fraction of a second, every light and monitor died, complete darkness. Then emergency red bulbs flickered on. The guard's radio crackled. "Lockdown intruder alert." My heart lurched. We had seconds. Reyes yanked a bundle of encrypted drives from the open rack, stuffed them into his jacket. I snatched the laptop and slammed the cabinet close, then activated the silent alarm in my wristband that would warn our extraction team if things went sideways. We bolted back down the corridor, past the wards of still blinking servers, adrenaline fueling our flight. My boots pounded tile and concrete, the broken compass burning in my pocket, like a secret I couldn't hide. We burst into the night rain, the SUV idling where we left it, headlights off. Marcus yanked me inside. Reyes slammed the door just as a security guard's torch beam swept the bay. We peeled away tires, squealing, leaving alarms and red lights flickering behind. Back at my apartment, I locked the door and collapsed against it, chest-heaving, rain dripping from my hair. On the kitchen table, the shattered compass lay next to the encrypted drives, our trophy and our curse. My phone buzzed a secure message from Agent Simone Ortega, warning me that the DOJ was preparing to seize all evidence as illegally obtained. I stared at the text fingertip, pressing against the broken compass, as though hoping it would spin true. My reflection in the window looked tired, ragged at the edges, but beneath the exhaustion was a flame of defiance. If they tried to dismiss our data because of procedure, we'd have to go public leak to Washington Probe, use Sarah Park's contacts. The social media storm would be uncontrollable. The public would force prosecutors' hands. But that path risked exposing more veterans' identities, thrusting victims into the spotlight they desperately wanted to avoid. I exhaled. Truth alone wouldn't be enough. I'd have to navigate public sentiment as skillfully as I'd navigated firewalls. I picked up the encrypted drives, ran a finger along the jagged edge of the compass, and whispered, "We keep fighting." Over the next 24 hours, I prepared for the next phase testimony under oath. I dressed in a crisp uniform, again pinning my medals with meticulous precision, each pin a reminder of a life of service sacrifices, invisible to my family until now. I practiced answering hostile questions in front of the mirror, voice calm, eyes, steady fingers, curled but still. My attorneys drilled me on process. Expect the defense to argue abuse of authority. Expect them to bring up my leave of absence, my mental state, even my first stint in therapy after Afghanistan. They would ask things like, "Colonel Morgan, why did you feel entitled to override federal security protocols?" I rehearsed my answer. Because lives were at stake. Yet rehearsals can't steel the soul against real-time psychological crossfire. I traced the compass tattoo on my wrist and recalled Grandpa's words. "When your world tilts, keep the compass close. It'll remind you who you are." I knew who I was, someone who refused to let betrayal stand unpunished, someone who saw patterns and refused to ignore them. But I also knew that the courtroom was a different battlefield, one where words could wound deeper than bullets. I took a deep breath, steadied my pulse with measured exhale, and prepared to step into the glare of television lights. The morning of the hearing, the hallways of the federal building buzzed with reporters, activists holding signs reading, "Protect our vets and family first," cameras perched on shoulders like birds of prey. I walked in shoulder-squared compass in my pocket, exactly where it always lay. My family was barred from attending Judge Liu, had granted them protective orders to avoid intimidation. But I knew they'd be watching from home faces lit by TV screens, wondering if I'd been right to tear their world apart. I stepped up to the witness stand and felt the wood grain under my fingertips, a solid anchor beneath my confidence. The prosecutor nodded to me, and I began, "Your Honor." "Members of the court, I am Major General Alexandra Morgan." My voice rang clear, echoing in the double-height chamber. I recounted the discovery of the deepfake email, the pattern recognition that led me to the printer ink stain, the forensic analysis tying Emily's voice to foreign operatives. I laid out every step, every risk I'd taken, hacking the courthouse AV, breaking into the Langley facility, framing each as a moral obligation rather than a criminal act. My hands didn't tremble. My words were measured. But inside my heart felt jagged, as that compass in my pocket, its broken needle still spinning. Cross-examination came next, sharp, pointed questions, meant to chip away at my credibility. "Are you implying that a federal judge's security system is less reliable than your personal code? Would you describe your actions as insubordination? How do we know this data wasn't tampered with?" I met each challenge with calm precision. I followed every cyber forensics protocol to preserve chain of custody. I acted to prevent greater harm. The backdoor logs are timestamped and verified by independent witnesses. Yet with every rebuttal, I could feel the jury's gaze shift, weighing soldierly conviction against prosecutorial doubt. My uniform felt suddenly heavy, each medal a glaring reminder of the expectations piled upon me and the prejudices I faced as a woman in the military who dared defy both family and federal procedures. In that moment, the compass in my pocket felt like a lifeline tethering me to the principle that no law is absolute when lives are at stake. Then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. The defense produced a video snippet, grainy footage from a security camera they claimed was taken the night I breached the server. The figure in the hood was me. They insisted, leaning over the rack in a menacing posture. The timestamp on their clip didn't match the one I'd recorded. Their metadata had been manipulated. My stomach lurched when the clip played. There I was in the same frame, but the color temperature was slightly off, the angle just shifted. It was a classic disinformation trick, spin the evidence back at the whistleblower. The judge paused, frowning. The prosecutor sputtered. My attorney shot me a look that begged for calm. I lifted my head, cleared my throat, and said, "Your Honor, I believe Exhibit D12 is doctored. The genuine security feed, which I have submitted in its original encrypted form, shows clear contrast in lighting and timestamps." I request the court's forensic team compare both versions. The judge nodded, and I felt a surge of clarity. I was not just defending my actions. I was defending objective truth against manufactured lies. The jury leaned forward. The tension in the room ratcheted up. As the judge ordered a recess to verify the footage, murmurs rippled through the courtroom. I glanced down at the compass in my pocket, its brass surface cool under my fingers. For the first time, its needle still pointing resolutely north. That small moment of stillness reminded me that even in the chaos of a battle fought with code and courtroom tactics, some truths remain fixed. Outside through the tall windows, I could see the city's skyline, the Pentagon spire in the distance, the Capitol dome shrouded in morning haze, and I realized how small we felt under those colossal symbols of power. Yet sometimes a single individual could tip the scales, could force hidden conspiracies into the open. I rose from the stand, the gavel ready to call us back, and thought, this is it, the turning point. Then the bailiff called, "All rise," and as we stood, the world held its breath along with me. I stood as the judge's gavel came down, feeling the weight of every eyeball in that hushed courtroom press into me like a physical force. The forensic team had returned in a flurry of exhibits and charts confirming that Exhibit D12 had indeed been doctored. The timestamps were off by minutes. The color profiles didn't match the unaltered feed, and the security metadata, my code signature, proved the original stream, was legitimate. When the judge announced the doctored clip inadmissible and restored our encrypted video as official evidence, relief washed over me in cold waves. But it was relief mixed with the sharp sting of knowing how close I'd come to having my case derailed by a cheap trick. In that moment, I felt every metal on my chest grow heavier, reminders not of past victories, but of how easily truth can be twisted. As the prosecutor took the floor again, I sank back into the witness stand chair, compass still warm in my pocket. The prosecutor's questions shifted tone softer now, acknowledging the gravity of showing foreign operatives scheming on federal property. "General Morgan, the court thanks you for your patience," she began. "You've demonstrated not only technical expertise, but integrity under pressure. Can you explain why you chose to override standard protocol to bring this evidence forward?" I took a breath, settling my shoulders. "Your Honor, years of service taught me that sometimes the greatest threats come from within, not insurgent camps overseas, but the people closest to us. Protocol matters, but when systems are manipulated to conceal treason, you either follow rules that hide the crime, or you break them to expose it. I chose exposure." That answer seemed to settle something in the jury. Their faces flickered between concentration and something like respect. I glanced toward where my parents would have sat, banned by protective order for their own safety, and felt a pinch of sadness. I knew they were watching on live stream, my mother's trembling hands pressed against a tablet screen, my father's proud posture ceding to guilt. None of this would forgive what they'd done, but I hoped it let them understand why I'd risk everything. Next, the prosecutor moved to the victims, those dozen veterans whose names had surfaced in Emily's forged grant applications. We'd prearranged for their testimony via recorded depositions. Their voices cut with quiet anger and resignation. One by one, their clips played a disabled Marine who lost his benefits, a former Air Force mechanic, facing foreclosure, a Navy corpsman with lifelong PTSD left without counseling funds. The room seemed to inhale with every story a collective intake of breath that felt like justice in motion. I watched through blurred vision as the judge nodded gravely, then tapped the gavel to summon the defense. The defense attorney rose, a woman known for her courtroom theatrics, and began her narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard compelling tales of hardship, but I remind you that these veteran statements cannot overshadow the standard of proof required. My client, General Morgan, admitted to hacking a federal facility, to overriding security systems. If we allow ends to justify means, here we set a dangerous precedent." She paced slowly, hand sweeping toward me like a conductor. "Where do we draw the line? Will any officer with a badge and a grievance claim sabotage to expose truth? What stops tomorrow's rogue operator from justifying deadly force on their own judgment?" Her words hit home. Social media was already ablaze with hashtags like rule of law and #stop vigilante generals. The tension between patriotic duty and procedural order was tearing public opinion in two. I felt my chest tighten. The broken compass in my pocket seemed to shift its needle, jittering east-west as if unsure which way to point. Grandpa's voice echoed, "When the world tilts, trust the needle." Tonight, that needle pointed to a truth deeper than law, that in some crises, silence and compliance are complicity. If I hadn't broken in, those veterans would still be suffering. If I hadn't spoken up, thousands more might have fallen prey to Project Eclipse's next phase. I rose to speak, voice measured but firm. "Your Honor, I respect the rule of law, always have. But the law exists to protect people, not to be a shield for crime. When those entrusted with our public safety hide evidence of espionage, refusing to act is a crime in itself. The veterans here lost not because protocols failed them, but because my own family weaponized protocols against them. I did what was necessary." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. The defense attorney's lip curled as she rose to object, but the judge silenced her with a small lift of a hand. "The witness may continue," he said. I nodded graciously, though every muscle in my body trembled. Courage, I reminded myself. Courage has always been my true north. I sat, and the defense attorney pivoted, now aiming at my character, General Morgan. "Isn't it true you've been under stress? You took administrative leave, saw therapists. You're not the same person your family knew. How can we trust your judgment after enduring combat and personal betrayal?" I felt the room narrow until it was just me, and the question, the implicit accusation that service betrayal and trauma made me unstable, that I was unfit to judge others' actions. It stung. But I refused to flinch. I leaned forward, voice calm. Yes, I served multiple tours in hostile environments. Yes, I faced challenges when I returned home. But adversity doesn't negate stability. It strengthens resilience. I sought help when I needed it, as any responsible leader would. The only person unfit for command is one who hides behind unfounded stigma to derail accountability. That last word, accountability, seemed to resonate beyond the courtroom. In a flash, I remembered the societal chasm, people who believe mental health issues disqualify a soldier, and those who believe transparency and help-seeking are a mark of strength. I realized my testimony wasn't just about me. It was about redefining what leadership and integrity meant in a modern military. I slipped a hand into my pocket, feeling the smooth brass of the compass, and drew on its symbolism, fractured but unbroken, imperfect, yet steadfast. The judge called for another recess to deliberate on whether to allow the victims' protective motions requests to seal their identities and limit public access to sensitive details. The media outside speculated that if personal data remained public, these veterans would endure new harassment. I couldn't bear the thought. I sent a quick encrypted text to Agent Ortega, push for protective sealing. "High priority." She replied with 2 words on it. Stepping out into the corridor, I let the security detail close the heavy oak doors behind me. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, and the distant echo of reporters' voices bled through the walls. My heart felt like a war drum as I walked to a private anteroom where my attorney waited. "Judge Liu approved the sealing," she said, offering a small smile. "Your victims remain protected." Relief surged through me, electric and raw. I clenched my fist against my chest, picturing those veterans' faces I'd never meet in person, whose lives we'd just safeguarded from further harm. But there was no time to savor victory. My phone buzzed again, an unmarked number 1 I didn't recognize. I answered on speaker. "Hello?" A cold, modulated voice replied. "You're playing a dangerous game, General. Phase 3 isn't just a data leak. It's live in 12 hours. The line clicked dead. My blood ran ice cold. I stared at the blank screen compass, heavy in my palm needle, twitching northeast. Phase 3 live in 12 hours. That meant Arvine had moved forward despite our infiltration. It meant new victims, deeper breaches, possibly national security secrets in enemy hands. I closed my eyes and saw that darkened foreign meeting room, Emily's face lit by laptop light, a masked figure, observing from the back. Project Eclipse was bigger than family greed. It was a calculated assault on the very foundations of trust. And they'd just given me a deadline. I straightened, masking the tremor in my voice. "They're not just going to sit back," I told my attorney. "We have 12 hours before Phase 3 goes live. We need to alert Cybersecurity Command, coordinate with DOJ Cyber Task Force. And My voice faltered as I realized what else needed to happen. The veteran's data. My own data traces the sealed court exhibits all at risk if Arvin tried to counterstrike. I needed to move offline off-grid, find a secure location to coordinate the takedown. But every choice carried risk. If I disappeared, the judge might hold my absence against me at trial. If I stayed tied to this courthouse, I'd be too slow. I swallowed and said I have to go dark. I'll transmit the remaining payload to Ortega, then I'll route through Shadowline's secure channels. Keep the court informed that I'm still available for testimony. Use a sealed affidavit. They'll understand once we stop Phase 3. My attorney's eyes widened. If you go dark, Alex, the court could interpret that as flight risk. They could revoke your protective order, lock you up. I nodded, voice firm. Then I'll accept that. Because if we let Phase 3 launch lives, and maybe the country are at much greater risk than any courtroom consequence. She hesitated, then placed a steady hand on my shoulder. You're a soldier, she said quietly. You fight the battles that can't wait. I nodded, feeling the familiar surge of resolve that had carried me through deserts and server rooms. I pressed the compass to my lips as if kissing a talisman. Find your true north, I whispered. It trembled in my pocket, as though sharing my fear and determination. The judge reconvened, the doors swung open, and I stepped back into public view, calm as ever. Reporters clamored, phones flashed, and I raised a hand, a soldier's salute, before slipping into the corridors leading to the secure elevator. 12 hours until Phase 3. 12 hours to dismantle an espionage web that stretched farther than I'd imagined. 12 hours to prove that one fractured compass, one unwavering soul, could still guide a country through its darkest hour. The elevator doors closed on me, and my security detail sealing out the world. My reflection shimmered in the stainless steel panel uniform. Crisp eyes set lips tight with purpose. I took a breath, feeling the compass's weight, and thought, this ends tonight. The doors slid shut completely, plunging me into dim red emergency lights. The descent felt like falling into the next battlefield, silent and foreboding, and as the elevator trundled down, I braced myself for the storm ahead, knowing I couldn't fail, because the world would never forgive a general who let her own blood or her own conscience steer her off course. The final battle loomed, and the compass's broken needle rose in defiance, unwavering, pointing true north. I jolted awake before dawn to the muted buzz of my secure comm unit, Agent Ortega's voice crackling in my ear. We've got 4 minutes until the branch nodes activate Phase 3 payloads. Ready. I sat bolt upright on my makeshift cot in the safe house, the broken brass compass resting on the nightstand like a silent sentinel. My uniform was replaced by a simple black hoodie and cargo pants, but the weight of my rank and what I'd set in motion pressed against my shoulders as tangibly as fabric. Ready, I whispered, brushing the compass with trembling fingers. All night I'd pored over the schematics, the distributed denial-of-service decoys, the fallback mirror servers in Eastern Europe, the stealth protocols Arvin had woven through veteran support networks. Phase 3 wasn't just data theft, it was live identity hijacking and system infiltration set to trigger at 0600 hours. Today, I had to stop it. Ortega's team in the DOJ Cyber Division was already inside the Justice Annex data bunker, fingers flying over keyboards to wrest control back from the malicious scripts we'd infiltrated yesterday. To my left, Marcus Allen monitored network logs on a portable terminal, eyes flicking between cascades of color-coded threats. To my right, Colonel Reyes coordinated the Shadowline field operatives, ready to swoop in if physical extraction was needed. We've patched the critical nodes, Marcus reported, voice taut but triumphant. But that mirror server in Belgrade is still live on a different subnet. I nodded, soul thrumming with urgency. If we didn't kill that node, Phase 3 would reinstantiate itself in seconds. I tapped commands on my own terminal, deploying the final kill switch. I'd coded a self-erasing worm that would target that specific IP range and wipe all Phase 3 executables. The seconds ticked down. My pulse hammered in my ears, but my fingers moved with the steadiness of someone who'd learned to trust muscle memory when everything else is chaos. At 0559, the collapse began one by one. The scripts I'd unleashed severed connections, backtracked, processes popped error messages across the mirror server's debug console. Then at 0600 sharp, the final confirmation, payload nullified. All Phase 3 instances terminated. A cheer rippled through the room, and then silence, as if the world itself exhaled. I sank back in my chair, chest heaving, the broken compass suddenly burning in my coat pocket. It had guided me through this digital battlefield into victory, a fractured needle pointing true north even when the map is missing. But relief was short-lived. My screen flickered with a new alert, hidden comms channel detected. A concealed data stream I hadn't anticipated flashing a single file, Project Charm. All hands. I felt goosebumps as I decrypted the packet, another node deeper in the network of Arvin's offshore shell companies, a repository for stolen clearance renewals, and live tracking feeds of military assets. Phase 3 had been only one chapter. Phase 4, codenamed Charm Offensive, was looming. The twist cut me like a blade. Arvin International hadn't just built a cyber espionage racket, they'd created a platform to manipulate veteran data into strategic propaganda, a way to sway public opinion, even influence elections. Suddenly, the stakes weren't just personal or familial. They were existential for our democracy. I slammed my fist on the table, scattering empty coffee cups. "They're playing the long game," I muttered. Ortega's voice came sharp. "We need to shut them down entirely." Marcus looked at me, worry etched on his face. "That means hitting their financial nodes in Cyprus and the Cayman Islands. We've got warrants, but it'll take days. Days we didn't have." I pressed my lips together, drawing on every ounce of that resilience the broken compass symbolized, imperfection forged into purpose. "Then we go physical," I said. "Shadowline coordinates a strike on their holding company's racks. Real servers, not just virtual nodes. We take out the heart of their infrastructure." Reyes's eyes blazed. "I'm ready when you are." We spent the next hour planning surgical strikes. DOJ task forces would seize servers in DC. Data centers, Shadowline operatives would disable fiber routes. In Frankfurt, agents in London would cut undersea cables linking Arvin's European hubs. It was a coordinated global takedown that no one public would ever see, an invisible war fought in server rooms and undersea trenches. I felt the weight of leadership slide fully onto my back. Every node we took down protected millions of veterans whose lives had already been upended by the scam. And every mistake could expose me as the rogue general the defense had branded me. There was no margin for error. By midday, the operation unfolded like clockwork. I sat in the safe house, surrounded by live feeds of DOJ cyber teams and Shadowline drones monitoring network traffic. As each target went dark, I watched the Phase 4 script implode, forensic logs showing failed execution attempts. Root certificates, revoked shell accounts closed. One by one, Arvin's virtual fortress crumbled. Then came the final coup de grace, a stealth payload that overwritten Arvin's core database, with random noise rendering recovery impossible. With the last flicker of green on my terminal, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt real closure. The broken compass in my pocket felt cool, inert, its purpose fulfilled. But even as I leaned back, a new message pinged on my secure line. "Request approved. Transport orders incoming." It was from the U.S. Marshals Service. My trial still loomed, and despite our success, the court would want to question my unauthorized actions. They'd probably haul me in, possibly detain me to determine whether I'd broken too many laws in pursuit of the truth. The compass's needle twitched in my pocket. True North demanded accountability as much as courage. I squared my shoulders, steeling for the next challenge. Shadowline operatives melted into the shadows. DOJ cyber teams celebrated their unseen victory. But I stood alone, face to the floor-to-ceiling window that looked out on a city unaware that its darkest threats had just been extinguished. Within an hour, a convoy of black SUVs arrived outside. Marshals in suits with earpieces briefed me under the awning. "General orders are to bring you in with minimal public exposure. This is a courtesy to your service record." They were polite but unyielding. I offered no resistance, compass tucked in my pocket, as I climbed into the front seat of the lead vehicle. The door closed, muffling the world. I glanced at my reflection in the tinted glass, crisp uniform again, medals, gleaming eyes resolute. I realized how far I'd come from the moment I stood in that courtroom under fluorescent lights to this instant, having orchestrated a global cyber strike. The The broken needle's lesson was clear direction isn't dictated by circumstance, but by conviction. The convoy wove through afternoon traffic sirens off, but security flanks tight. As we passed a veterans outreach center, I caught sight of a group of former service members waving small American flags, faces bright with relief and gratitude. My heart clenched. This was why I'd risked everything, because no protocol mattered more than protecting those who'd protected us. And yet the broader question loomed in a world where technology can warp truth and weaponize trust. Who watches the watchman? I closed my eyes briefly, drawing a steadying breath. At the Federal Holding Facility's entrance, the marshals escorted me inside. The scanner-beeped metal doors whooshed shut, and I felt the hush of confinement settle around me. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the operation. Here, time moved by the clank of cell doors and the distant hum of lights. An officer led me to a processing room where I'd give a statement, submit to questioning face possible charges for unauthorized access of government systems. I thought of Luke and Emily, now languishing behind bars for their part in the scheme punished, but not free from the network of evil they'd served. And I thought of the veterans whose lives we'd safeguarded, many of whom would never know my name, but would sleep easier tonight. They seated me and began the administrative formalities, verifying my identity, logging my actions, reading me my rights. It was surreal. 4 hours ago, I was orchestrating a takedown of an international spy ring. Now I was a prisoner in my own country, accused of crimes I committed to unearth greater sins. The compass lay on the table between us, its broken needle pointing northwest, as if urging me not to waver. I reached out and tapped its brass side. The officer looked up, eyebrow raised, but didn't comment. "General Morgan," he said, voice official. "We need your detailed affidavit for the case file. Are you prepared to provide that now?" I nodded, pulling a legal pad from my jacket. "I am," I said, voice steady. "Let's begin." As I started dictating every step Discovery infiltration takedown, I felt a profound calm settle over me. Each word was a testament to the truth, a bulwark against the lies that had almost swallowed me whole. The broken compass sat at the edge of the table, a visible symbol of my journey. Imperfect scarred, but unwavering in purpose. Outside the reinforced door, the world hurried on social media feeds, exploding with headlines about Arvind's collapse, think pieces debating the legality of my actions, veterans forums celebrating our victory. But none of that reached into this quiet room where I laid bare my soul and my strategy. I paused when I finished reading the last paragraph, and the officer closed his notebook. "Thank you, General," he said softly. "Your affidavit will go straight to the special prosecutor." I nodded, rising. They led me down a corridor whose walls were lined with mugshots and plaques honoring fallen heroes. I brushed my fingertips along the cool metal edges of the plaques, feeling at once small and integral to a legacy of service. They opened a metal door and escorted me into an adjoining room, no cell but a secure holding area where I would wait until the judge set bail or remanded me pending trial. I stood in that antiseptic room, the broken compass heavy in my pocket, my mind racing through the next steps: legal defense, Senate inquiries, oversight hearings. The story wasn't over, but for a moment I allowed myself a different thought. Perhaps this was the real test, the cost of choosing conscience over comfort, of breaking the silence when truth demanded it. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I held them back, breathing slowly, feeling the compass's weight settle like an anchor. Then, as I gazed at my reflection in the small window, I realized something. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important. I'd faced enemies abroad and betrayed family at home. I'd upended the lives of people I once loved. But I'd also saved lives, upheld my oath, and torn down a conspiracy that threatened us all. The broken compass had led me here, not to safety, but to a reckoning, and I would meet it head-on. The guard unlocked the door. "Time's up," he said. I nodded, slipping the compass into my hand one last time before dropping it gently into my pocket. My next battle would be in a courtroom, under oath, with every nuance of legality laid bare. But I knew who I was and what I stood for. As the guard ushered me back into the corridor, I lifted my chin. Beyond those heavy doors lay the world I'd fought to protect, rife with threats both visible and hidden, waiting for someone willing to stand their ground. I took a final breath and stepped forward, the broken needle in my pocket, pointing true north toward justice, whatever the cost. The door swung closed behind me, and I walked into the next chapter, heart steady, resolve unbroken.